Hey guys, Churchy here. So, combat in Outward can feel a bit clunky at times and can be pretty frustrating when you first start out. So, in this guide, I want to give you a basic overview of the various aspects of combat in Outward. This guide doesn't cover magic, so with that said, let's get right into it. Is fighting worth it? Something worth thinking about and quickly mentioning here is that in Outward, before you even start fighting, an important question to ask yourself is if the fight you're about to get involved with is actually worth it, or if avoiding the situation and saving your resources for later is the better choice. So keep that in mind while playing and react to different situations accordingly. Main hand weapons. There are a lot of different types of weapons in Outward, so I'd encourage you to experiment with the different weapons and their attack combinations and then choose one that suits your playstyle. Here's a quick rundown of the different weapon types. Swords are balanced weapons with reasonable damage and impact and are generally faster than axes or maces. The sword's attack combinations reflect this. An interesting thing to note about the two-handed sword is that some of its attack combinations result in a spinning sidestep, which can sometimes be used to dodge attacks. It's not super effective, but it can be useful sometimes. Maces have a higher impact, but slower attack speed than axes and swords. The mace's attack combinations are slower. The special attack in particular is slow, but does a lot of extra impact. Axes sit somewhere in the middle of swords and maces, generally trading impact for extra damage and a faster attack speed. The one-handed and two-handed axes attack combinations have a lot of forward momentum and work well for an aggressive playstyle. Spears are great at keeping some distance between you and your opponent, and their attack combinations emphasize this. Polearms have decent damage, decent impact, and their attack combinations are mostly large sweeping attacks, so they're good for hitting multiple enemies. Staves have low damage with reasonable impact and are primarily designed to provide bonuses for spellcasters. Each of the melee weapon types and their one-handed and two-handed variations have a unique skill. You'll be able to get the unique skill for whatever weapon you have equipped for free if you talk to Burak when you first leave Cierzo. You can also pick these skills up from different trainers later in the game for 50 silver, so it isn't a big deal if you miss out on the skill you want. Bows are a different playstyle entirely from the other main hand weapons, and from my experience, synergize best with a high movement speed and hit-and-run tactics. Again, I would encourage you to experiment with the different weapons and their attack combinations until you find something that fits your playstyle. Offhand weapons. Offhand weapons can be used in combination with one-handed weapons to complement different playstyles and to meet the requirements to use certain skills. Here's a quick rundown of the different offhand weapons and items. Chakrams are great at dealing damage to multiple enemies in an area, and the skill Chakram Arc is great at knocking enemies off their feet. Daggers can be hard to get the most effective use out of, but when combined with the pain and confusion debuffs, some of the dagger skills can inflict an incredible amount of damage. Pistols deal a ridiculous amount of damage and impact to individual targets, but suffer from incredibly long reload times, which can leave you vulnerable. The pistol skills can make for some interesting playstyles, but I've gotten the most use out of pistols by filling my quick slots with 3 or 4 loaded pistols and then firing them while standing in a sigil of wind to double their damage, and swapping between them rather than having to reload. Lanterns provide light, and when held in your offhand rather than attached to your backpack, they can be used to cast the flamethrower spell. You can also use the throw lantern skill, which deals some decent fire damage but permanently destroys the lantern. One lantern that's worth mentioning is the Lantern of Souls, which you can acquire during the Blue Chamber faction questline. When held in your offhand, the Lantern of Souls provides some resistances and can be used as part of some endgame builds to achieve 100% resistance to most damage sources in the game. Lexicons provide you with access to rune magic, which can be quite useful. Runic Protection, which can be cast by combining the Dez and Egoth runes, is particularly powerful and used in a lot of different builds. Shields provide extra impact resistance, so are good for blocking high impact hits. They also have a high impact, which can be used to great effect with some of the shield skills in the game. If you're using a one-handed weapon, then choosing an offhand weapon or item that will complement your playstyle can be pretty important, especially because some of the skills for the different offhand weapons and items can cost quite a bit of silver. So once again, consider which weapon or item will work best with the playstyle you're aiming for. Blocking. Blocking is an important part of combat in Outward. It prevents all damage from melee attacks and physical projectiles. You can also block some magical projectiles, and some skills will allow you to block some spells as well. Whether it's with a shield or weapon, blocking will increase your stability by 50%, which is important when you're trying to avoid being knocked down. When talking about blocking, I think it's worth mentioning that there are a lot of really useful block skills that you can learn from various trainers. Usually there'll be a skill which blocks a hit and then counters with an attack. I love these skills and find them to be very powerful. They're definitely worth looking into as you progress through the game. Impact and stability. Stability is a measure of your balance, and impact attacks lower your stability bar. If it falls below 50%, you'll be staggered by each hit, and if your stability bar is drained to 0%, you'll be knocked down. Once you stand back up, your stability bar will refill completely. Impact resistance lowers the impact damage caused to your stability bar, which will also make blocking use less stamina because the amount of stamina used to block is based on the impact damage taken. All of this applies to the enemies in the game as well. They have stability bars and can be staggered and knocked down. In most cases, you want to stagger an enemy as much as possible before knocking them down, and some of the most powerful endgame builds use this tactic. I'll quickly mention here that a great combination at the start of the game is to use the push kick skill and then immediately follow up with an attack from your weapon. In a lot of cases, this will cause enough impact damage to stagger the early game enemies. Also keep in mind the rage boon, which you can get from a skill as well as various potions and foods. It will increase your impact, and more impact is always good. Mineral tea and a couple of other sources provide the impact resistance up buff. More impact resistance is also always good, especially later in the game. Dodge rolls and movement speed. Dodge rolls and movement speed are both important aspects of combat in Outward. Dodging allows you to avoid attacks that you might not have any resistance to, or attacks that may otherwise stagger you or cause damage over time effects. It can be used in some builds to replace a lot of blocking. Backpacks will slow down the dodge roll, so it's sometimes a good idea to drop your backpack while fighting. However, there are a couple of backpacks that won't slow your dodge, and those backpacks are the Adventurer backpack and the Scaled Satchel. There's also a breakthrough skill on the Rogue Engineer tree called Feather Dodge. It also removes the dodge slowdown caused by backpacks. Dropping your backpack will also usually give you a small increase to your movement speed. Movement speed, when combined with a bow, can be one of the most overpowered playstyles in the game, but it can also be really useful to have a high movement speed in melee combat as well, because it allows you to more easily weave in and out of attack range and to move around your opponents to avoid attack combinations or to strike at an ideal time. Enemy attack combinations. Most of the enemies in Outward have their own attacks and attack combinations, and they all vary greatly in damage, speed, reach, and impact. So one thing that I'd suggest that you get into the habit of doing is taking some time during each fight to try and observe your opponent's attack patterns and the pacing and rhythm of those patterns. The more you learn and understand about an opponent's attack patterns and timings, the easier combat will become. DOT, resistances, and weaknesses. Another important thing to take note of is that some enemies will cause damage over time effects like burning and poison if they hit you or hit you enough. With enough resistances, most of these effects can be completely ignored, but it's useful to be aware of them. Here's a quick list of some common DOT effects and how to treat them. If you're burning, drink water. If you're bleeding, apply a bandage. And if you're poisoned, drink an antidote. There are quite a few damage types in Outward, and I may cover damage types, resistances, potions, and varnishes more in depth in another guide. but for the purposes of this combat overview guide, I'll say that you should try to learn the resistances and weaknesses of the different enemies you come across, as well as the types of damage they deal, and then when possible, drink the appropriate potions and apply the appropriate varnishes to your weapons to make fighting them easier. For example, most of the enemies classed as Scourge have some physical resistance, are weak to lightning, and deal physical and decay damage. So when fighting them, a good start before engaging would be to wear some armour with physical resistance, drink a Possess potion to get some extra decay resistance, and then apply a bolt varnish to your weapon for some lightning damage. You might also consider drinking a Blessed potion to get some more lightning damage as well. You can push this further with more potions and skills. 2 skills that are ridiculously powerful in terms of resistances when combined together are Shamanic Resonance from the Cabal Hermit tree and Master of Motion from the Warrior Monk tree. The Runic Protection spell, in conjunction with the Runic Prefix skill from the Rune Sage tree, can be used to push this combination even further, and this group of skills is a combination you'll see in a lot of builds, so it's worth looking into. Armour and Protection. Another thing to consider is that a lot of the enemies in Outward do physical damage, so having a high physical resistance and protection can be quite useful sometimes. Physical resistance will reduce the physical damage you take by a percentage, and protection will reduce the physical damage you take by a flat amount. But it's important to remember that there are also a lot of enemies that can hurt you with different damage types, and wearing a lot of heavy armour can slow your movement speed significantly, so it's not always the best choice. Regeneration, stamina and health. A common issue new players have in Outward is running out of stamina during a fight and then finding themselves in a 5-minute bout of walking in circles and occasionally poking an enemy. It's a pretty frustrating situation to be in and can really put a person off playing. A good way to tackle this issue is to make sure you're constantly stacking the water effect and a stamina recovery effect together. Stamina recovery has 5 recovery levels. Different foods provide different tiers. A good source of stamina regen when starting out is Gabbary Tartine. You can make 3 tartine by combining 1 bread and 1 Gabbary jam at a cooking pot. This is a good recipe because both of the ingredients are stocked by town chefs and aren't too expensive, so it's usually pretty easy to stockpile some tartine. A good late game replacement is marshmallow tartine. You can buy marshmallow jelly from Unz, the melon farmer, in Monsoon, and then combine 1 marshmallow jelly with 1 bread to make 3 marshmallow tartine. Marshmallow tartine provides stamina recovery 5. Health regen is another great way to keep yourself in a fight. Much like the water effect and stamina recovery, you can stack bandages with the health recovery effect. The health recovery effect also has 5 levels. A couple of good sources of health regen in the early game are jerky and meat stew. You can make 5 jerky by combining 2 meat and 2 salt at a cooking pot. Jerky gives health recovery 2. You can make 3 meat stew by combining 1 meat, 1 vegetable and 1 salt at a cooking pot. Meat stew provides health recovery 3. Some health recovery items to consider later in the game are the Alpha Sandwich and the Bread of the Wild. You can make 3 Alpha Sandwiches by combining 1 raw alpha meat and 1 bread at a cooking pot. An Alpha Sandwich gives health recovery 4. You can make 3 Bread of the Wild by combining 1 smoke root, 1 raw alpha meat, 1 wool shroom and 1 bread. Bread of the Wild gives health recovery 5, and you can find all the ingredients in the Enmerkar Forest. Anyway, that's it for this combat overview guide. Hopefully you've learned a thing or two and have a basic understanding of the many aspects of combat in Outward. Thanks for watching, have a good day or night, whichever it may be, and I'll see you in the next video.